Hello and welcome to another video tutorial Monday. This week I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing some hand stitching and show you how I usually do it. You know, I incorporate hand stitching on a lot of my cards and I get a lot of questions about it. So I just wanted to do a pretty easy, simple card and show you how I do it. So what I'm going to do first is start out with my card base here. I have my card base made out of craft cardstock, just a standard size A2 card that folds from the top. And then I have this piece cut out from this Cosmo Cricut mini deck from Salt Air, cut out to my standard size card front, which is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do is just adhere this down in the middle. You can see I just put a little strip of adhesive in the middle. This will allow me to get the right position on the card. And then it will be in place and centered for when I add the stitching around the outside, but I'll still be able to add some embellishments as we go along here. So the first thing I want to do before I do anything else is go ahead and punch my holes. So what I'm going to do is take my ruler. Actually, I'm going to use a combination of 2 different rulers on this. I have my T-square and this is my regular ruler. I like my T-square for using the straight edge to line up with the card, and that'll give me a really good idea whether my line is straight or things like that. So what I want to do is just measure in 1/8 of an inch from the edge of my pattern paper and make marks right there and right there, and then also up here. And then I can flip my ruler like this and draw in my, and then also do lines right here, 1/8 of an inch in, here 1/8 of an inch in, and up at the top as well. Now I'll switch over to my other ruler and I can just use these lines, or the marks that I just drew, as guidelines for placing my ruler. And this will just make sure that I don't have to draw in any extra pencil so that I don't have to erase it later, but I can still have perfectly straight lines. And I'm going to put my mouse pad underneath my little project here, line the ruler up with the pencil, making sure it's straight, and then I will just use my ruler as a guide to puncture with my Tim Holtz retractable craft pick every 1/8 of an inch. So I have my line perfectly straight across the top. I'm flipping it over so you can see it a little bit better. And I'm just going to do this around the rest of the card as well. So now that I've gone around my entire card, as you can see here, with the piercing tool, I can just go back in and correct any areas that might have went a little wonky. Looks like everything looks pretty much okay though. And then I can go back in with a nice eraser. This is just a regular white eraser I got from an art store. They're less than $1. And just erase my pencil marks. I do it now rather than later because otherwise I'll forget. And then before we stitch around the outside, I've been looking at this ribbon by My Mind's Eye and think it'll go really well with this card. So what I want to do is actually adhere it to the card first so that I can sew right over it. And I'm just going to use some score tape for this. I got this from Paper Trading, but lots of places sell it around the internet. I believe you can even get it at Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just going to trim off this piece and make sure this lies straight on my work surface because it has a tendency to kind of get a little funky. And then put down the adhesive on top of the straight piece of twill. You can really press it in there and then just peel it off. You could also use red line tape for this. I just happen to like score tape a little bit better because that red piece of tape that you peel off all seems to stick to me and it gets really annoying. So I have it about 1/3 the way up the card. I'm just going to fold it over the sides. You can see that here. And I think now I am ready to start sewing around my card. So what I'm going to do is take my embroidery floss, which this is just from DMC. This is their color 712. It's their cream. It's the same stuff that you get in the little skeins from Joann's, but this is just the really big quantity of it. I think it's 425 meters. I just figured I'd be using a lot of it. So I just bought this for about $15 online at joann.com. And I'll have a link to that as well. And I'm just going to cut off a piece. I'm only going to go around this once, so it'll be an in-out thing. So I'm just going to account for each side once. So I'm just going to use, okay, about this much thread on the top, about this much thread on the side, about this much on the bottom, about this on the other side, and then just a little bit more just for any mistakes or something that I make. And then, actually for this I'm going to, this is 6-ply thread, as most embroidery floss is. I'm going to take off 2 of those pieces of thread that are woven together and just separate them. And it's just easy to go very slowly here, otherwise you can end up with a big tangled mess. And this will just make it a lighter stitch. I've used 6 before, but I tend to stick with 4 the most. It just looks the best to me. But it's all personal preference. And then this is just the 2 strands. I'm just going to toss that. And now I have this 4-strand. Here, I'll pull out some of the 6-strand, and you can see the difference. This is the 6-strand. This is the 4-strand. So there's definitely a difference, but it's an understated little flavor to it. Now I'm going to use my needle, and I have a whole bunch of needles. I just look for them at the store and see which ones have longer, thin loops on the end. And this one is fairly sharp. I like the sharper ones, even though I tend to poke myself with them a lot. And now I'm just going to thread the needle. I usually lick the thread or wet it with my fingers to get it all in one little clump. And then you just feed it through very carefully. Sometimes it takes a couple tries. And there we go, we have it doubled over. I'm going to start on the back, just right over here, and feed it through. And for now, when I go all the way around, I can just tie the ends together. But for now I want to keep it in one place, so I'm going to use a piece of washi tape just to hold it down on the back. And you know, this doesn't really look that bad. You could just leave it like this if you really wanted to. And then I'll just go in, down through the next hole, and up through the next hole after that. And you just keep going around the card like that. It's very simple. I like to do this while I'm watching TV or checking email, because you can get going on this without really having to do much thinking about it. So I'm just going to keep going for a little while now until I get to this part, and then I'll show you what I do there. Okay, so I've stitched on this side, now I'm to this orange part, and I'm just going to keep stitching like I was before. The only difference right now, and the kind of tricky part, is you kind of have to guess where the holes are. And the cool thing is that since we measured it out perfectly, you can get a very good guess of where the next hole is going to be. So you just push straight down so that you don't warp the threads of the ribbon at all. And you just kind of feel around with the tip of your needle where the hole is, push through, so there we go, we've sewed through the orange ribbon. And now I'm just going to keep going around the rest of the card, and I'll be back in a second when I have that finished. Alright, so I've gone around the entire card, just stitching in and out, and I am going to tie off my thread. You'll see here I had an odd number of holes, or an even number. I'm not sure which one it is, but either way my stitches didn't end up exactly every other one. This last one is actually a double stitch, but that's okay. It's not going to really show up in the final product very much, so I'm just going to live with it and tie a little knot back here between the beginning of the thread and the end of the thread, and then just trim it off. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then we have the nice stitching around our card, so we can embellish it. So I think what I'm going to do is take this phrase set from Hero Arts. It's one of my favorite ones, and it's pretty new. It's the CL520 Live and Laugh. And I want to use this "You Are Very Special" sentiment. And I have this little piece of vintage cream cardstock from Paper Tray Ink. It is 5/8 of an inch tall. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment in this Jenny Bolin Spice Tin ink. So I have my sentiment stamped, and I think I'm going to put this right about here on my card and have it come off this edge. I think first I want to round the corners with my corner chomper. I'm going to use the 1/4 inch setting. And since I haven't inked any of the other edges of this card, I won't ink these, even though I like to ink edges, so it's hard not to. But I'm just going to add some foam adhesive to the back of this sentiment. I'll trim off the excess. And then I'm going to add these buttons onto the card right about here on this side. I wanted to put them over here to start out with, but it didn't look quite right, so I'm switching them over to the other side. And in order to do this, I'm just going to put them down on my project with glue dots, but I'll sew some of this thread through them first. And I already have my needle threaded, so why not? And I'm going to tie them from the front, just to add a little bit of interest. So I just put the thread through the button using the needle, and I'm tying it in a double knot, trimming the thread down to the edges of the button. And now I can take my mini glue dot and stick it to the back of the button. And this one can go right here. And I'll just do this to the other two buttons. Alright, so now that I have my buttons attached, just with some glue dots, and I just threaded them before I put them on the card, I think we're done for this week. So this basically just showed you how I do my sewing. And it has a nice touch to any card. I love that handmade look. You could do this with a machine as well if you wanted to, if you didn't want to go through the work of actually doing it by hand. But I think it's really relaxing, so I encourage you to give it a try. So here's the finished card for this week. And here's the close-up. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you again next week on another video tutorial Monday.